Please help me welcome Brooke Terry. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, I am glad to be here. I would love to learn a little bit about you so I know how to speak tonight. How many of you know what a charter school is? Great, great. How many of you have a child or grandchild or a friend that you know of that attends a charter school? Okay, not very many. How many of you know what an education tax credit is, or education tax credit scholarship? Voucher. How many of you know what vouchers are? Okay, those are the same thing, and I'll go into that. Okay, let me talk a little bit about problems in the education system, and then I'll talk about solutions. And I want to start off by saying I am not here to attack teachers, and I'm not here to attack education. I'm here from a reform mindset, saying that what we have is not working for every single child, and so for some children, another option is going to be the best fit. So how many teachers do I have in the audience? Okay. How many retired teachers? How many people are married to teachers that are home? Okay. Sometimes at Republican Club meetings, there's a lot of retired teachers, so you never know your audience. Okay, so let me mention what I consider to be some of the problems in our education system. It is a one-size-fits-all model. We have high teacher turnover. We have failing schools that we're unable to shut down. We have low teacher morale. Too many regulations at both the state and federal level. We have empty school buildings, or school buildings that are half full. We have a high number of employees in schools that are non-teachers, meaning they are not in the classroom teaching. For every teacher that the public school system in Texas employs, there is a non-teacher. It is a 1-to-1 ratio. That's a lot of money in salaries and benefits, and we give our teachers amazing, and all school personnel, amazing benefits. They have a great pension system. Okay, what about teacher quality? How smart is the teacher in the classroom? Well, unfortunately, those that choose to major in education at our colleges and universities and choose to teach are in the bottom 25% of our ACT and SAT score takers. So the really smart women and men are choosing to become lawyers and doctors and entrepreneurs and doing other things. And we have some folks that choose to go into teaching that are bright, but for the most part, they follow the money or follow where they're going to get respect. And when we pay a lazy teacher and an amazing teacher the same amount of money, and there's no bonus for the amazing teacher, and they can't make any more for doing anything better at that school, and the bad teacher can't get fired. And in fact, the Teacher of the Year teacher, because they just got hired a year or two ago when they have layoffs, they're the first one out the door, even though they won an award and got a scholarship for the school. Because of tenure and because of hiring policies, they're let go first, and that teacher who is handing out worksheets and showing videos in class, they get to keep their job. So the system, not the teachers necessarily, but the system as a whole is not have the right incentives to encourage the kind of behavior we want from administrators and from teachers. And so I'm here to talk about a different type of education system, one where the free market is encouraging things. And sometimes this kind of information turns people off because they say, well, this is education. Our kids aren't widgets. You know, you can't apply those business principles to education. And I would argue and say, yes, you can. So I'm going to talk through that a little bit. How many of you have been following funding in education? What percentage do you think we spend at the state level, the Texas budget, for public education? How many would you say, maybe 30% of our budget is education? Higher, yes. It is around 40% of our state budget is public education, K through 12 in Texas. So it's basically public education and Medicare and Medicaid. Those are the two cost drivers for the explosive growth in our spending. So where is that money going? Well, what do you think the average teacher salary is in this area? Around 45 to 50. For urban areas, they tend to make more. In suburbia, it's the rural areas where the teachers are paid less. How many of you would want to get paid off of the salary schedule? How many of you know what a salary schedule is? That's a term that most people don't know. It is a chart where it literally lists how many years you've been teaching, and then you go across and you find out what your salary is. And so the teacher that's been teaching 20 years is probably making around 60, and the teacher that's year 2 or 3, they started out at 40, 45, and they may get a $1,000 pay raise every year. They get a step up. And sometimes the legislature will do an across-the-board pay raise to teachers, and everybody gets an extra grand. But you're never going to make $100,000, $150,000 teaching, right? And most people know that, and so they know that they're not going to go into teaching to make money. Now, if they really want to be in education, they teach for a little bit, and then usually they transition into administration. And so some of our best teachers end up not being in the classroom because of the way we pay. We do pay our administrators much better. So let's talk a little bit about trends too. So I did a paper before I left TPPF, and it is still very pertinent. What I did is I looked at, it's called Examining Decades of Growth in K-12 Spending, a close look at spending and achievement trends. And I was trying to see, is Texas different than the US? And then how different is the US versus other developed nations? So I got some data from various sources, and I compared us to the other 30 developed nations. So the US spends more money on public education. We spend 7.4% of our GDP than the average of the 30 developed nations. They only spend 6.1. So the US is spending more than the average of all the other developed countries, okay? Well, where's that money going? We spend a higher percentage on non-teachers, and other countries spend more money on teacher salaries. Okay, so if it's non-teachers, then that is maybe an administrator, maybe it is someone else, maybe it's in that actual school building, but they're not in the classroom. Okay, what about buildings? What do you think? Do you think we spend a lot of money on facilities? Absolutely. We spend more money on facilities and buildings than all of the OECD developed countries on average. Okay, so let's talk a little about where our academics are. So out of these 30 countries, where do you think we rank in math? So let me read you a couple of the country names so you can get a sense. Finland, Korea, Japan, Canada, Denmark, Australia, Germany, Ireland, Sweden, France, Norway, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, United Kingdom, Mexico. Where do you think we rank out of these 30 countries now?
28.
28.
25. 25. So the countries below us are Portugal, Italy, Greece, Turkey, and Mexico in math. Finland's number 1. Okay, in science, we're not much better. We're 24th. Korea and Finland are 1 and 2 in science. And this is old data, but it hasn't changed much. So how do we know that? When kids are 15, they take a test called the PISA, P-I-S-A, and that is the test they use to compare all these countries. So these are 15-year-olds. So one of the things that we are trying to figure out as reformers is if our kids start out doing really well in kindergarten and first grade, because they do. They know their math, they know their reading. Why is it if they're way up here compared to other countries, do they slowly go downhill? And that's a question that a lot of people are trying to figure out. Some big names in education reform, like the Gates Foundation, they've spent all this money thinking, well, it's the size of the school, so let's just build smaller schools. Well, that hasn't really worked. Okay, well, what if we did some kind of teacher training and we did some different approach, or let's try a different curriculum, or let's try. So there's been a lot of magic bullets, and they really haven't worked. But what has happened, unfortunately, for taxpayers is that the money keeps going up on how much we're spending. So we're spending around roughly $11,000 per student every year, kindergarten through 12th grade. $11,000. That's Texas data. Yeah, the cost of living is different in other states, so it's kind of hard to compare. So you will see surveys that say Texas is really low in education spending, but our cost of living is so much less that our salaries may look less to New York or New Jersey, but our cost of living is much less. So anyway, so we've got some problems in education, and we have some really well-intentioned women and men that go into the teaching profession, and they want to do a good job, and they want to help kids learn, and then they hit their head against the wall, and they get frustrated, and so what ends up happening is they either learn to bite their tongue, or they quit. Or maybe they try to fix it and go into administration. And so what I would love to see is teachers that are amazing teachers. I'd love them to make $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. I would love for there to be that kind of innovation where we don't assume that everyone needs to be paid the same. And that's part of what education reform is in teacher pay, is you may have a base salary. Let's say everyone starts out making 30, and then we're going to reward you based on performance. And that can get a little controversial because sometimes teachers or different groups say, well, it's not fair to test with test scores. Well, how do you test the PE teacher? Well, how do you test the career and technology education teacher, right? If they're taking wood shop or something. Well, we could probably figure that out. That's not a really good excuse to say everyone should make the same amount, because there's some amazing teachers that maybe would work part-time. Let's look at NASA, right? So we've got all these bright engineers that are probably looking for jobs now if they haven't already found them. Wouldn't it be great if you were a school district in Houston and you had the flexibility and the innovation to hire one of them as an adjunct faculty, and they could teach a class 2 days a week, and it could be some kind of amazing AP physics course, and it could be some hands-on, and maybe their class could be bigger than 30 because it's almost like a college class. Maybe we could let 50 or 60 students in, and maybe we could have some really neat shadowing opportunities with some employers like ExxonMobil or other things like that. Let's be creative. But that, most likely, that engineer is not allowed to be in the classroom because they're not certified, right? And if you're a higher ed professor, unless there's some kind of arrangement with that school, you're not allowed to teach in public ed either because you're certified at the higher ed level. And your teacher pension doesn't talk to public ed. So if you go down and teach 12th grade versus teaching freshman level courses, then the teacher pensions don't talk. And you don't want to put money in a new system if you're already putting it in the other system. And so there's just a lot of things that complicate things that shouldn't, right? If we want to encourage the best and brightest in teaching, then we need to rethink that. And another thing that I would say is, as we've increased in the amount of money that we've spent, our test scores on the ACT and SAT have really stayed the same. It's basically a straight line for the last 20 years. Now, some will argue, the student population has changed. We do have a higher percentage of students that are minority, that come from families where they're not reading at home, where they're not eating good meals, maybe where English isn't spoken at home. And that may be true. And that's all the more reason why we need those really smart, engaged, energized teachers in the classroom who are willing to give the extra mile to make sure they can bring these kids up to level and then continue to encourage them. So let me give you a couple other numbers about money, and then we're going to talk about school choice. So again, since you're fiscal conservatives, I thought you'd want some Texas-specific data. So I looked at TEA data, that's the Texas Education Department data, and I looked for trends. And so over a 20-year period, education staff in Texas, these are all the employees, all the education personnel, increased 71.5%. So that was from 1989 to 2009. So 20-year period, staff increased 71.5%, so 72%. What do you think enrollment increased? Now, we're a high growth state. We have a lot of people moving here and a lot of people having kids. Our enrollment increased 44%. So what would make sense is that your personnel increase and your enrollment increase would be around the same. That has not happened. And so that's partly why our costs have skyrocketed, because we have so many more people employed than we used to have in education. And then not only do they have salaries, but they have benefits and all things like that. Let me give you a number from 1949. The ratio, and this is a US ratio, in public ed of teachers to non-teachers was 7 to 3. So for every 7 teachers, there were 3 non-teachers. And again, our ratio now is 1 to 1. So I'm not telling you specifically what we need to cut. I don't know that answer. I'm just giving you data and saying this is where our money is going. And I don't necessarily think spending money in education is bad. I read with my kids a lot, and I'm looking forward to picking a good school for them. And I want their teacher to be well compensated. I just want to make sure that as taxpayers we can continue to afford it and not be bankrupted by it, and not get frustrated that we're not getting the results that we want. So another thing you need to look at when you hear about money, and this might be a number that your state rep is going to throw out, or your state senator, they're going to tell you how much we spend per student in a school district in this area. You need to make sure that it's total expenditures. The numbers reported in the media usually exclude bond debt, and they exclude facilities and debt service, and so that's not the total number. So the total number that's usually reported in the media is that we spend around $7,000 or $8,000 per kid. That's not right. It's about $11,500. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you guys are informed, because some of what you read in the newspapers isn't always accurate on, well, we're ranked 47th in spending. well, let's look at all the information here, you know, and what numbers are you looking at? So I have some handouts that I have from the Friedman Foundation. I'd love some help passing this out. I would love for everybody to get one of these red books. These are school choice guides. This is from the Friedman Foundation, and it's called the ABCs of School Choice. And I would love for y'all to turn to the map of the United States on page 5 and 6, once you get it. And again, these were donated by the Friedman Foundation. They mailed me a box, about 200 of them, so they're really great people over there. And they have a lot of good information on their website. So this is a map of the United States, and this is showing you the current school choice programs across the country. 5 and 6. It's a map of the U.S. So this is something you guys can take home and look at in more detail, but Texas doesn't have anything. Do we need more? Do we not bring enough? Mom's gonna dig through my bags. You can have mine in a second. When I'm done, I can pass mine to you. So there's different kinds of school choice. You've got vouchers, you've got scholarships, you've got charter schools. So charter schools are public schools funded with public dollars. Vouchers are private schools funded with public dollars. And tax credit scholarships are running around vouchers. So it is a way to, it's not a voucher, it is a way to use tax dollars in a way that isn't actually public education money. So in Texas, the proposal that we've been pushing for years and years and years is a tax credit against the business tax. Many states have an income tax. We don't, right? Texas doesn't, and Texas doesn't want one. So we're not gonna encourage some kind of policy that is a tax credit against income tax. So to be creative. So I know the business tax isn't popular and some people like to get rid of it, but it's the only tax that really works for this policy proposal. So the idea is a big company like Dell that supports education reform could give a donation of $500 million to a nonprofit, and that nonprofit would hand out scholarships to whoever you want to be eligible. It could be poor kids, it could be kids that are special needs, it could be kids that are in foster care, it could be kids that are military kids, their parents are in active service. You could really frame the program any way you want. It could even be middle class kids. So this is probably what I would recommend if Texas were to move forward. Vouchers are a very negative word in our state. So tax credit scholarship programs, you see we have 14 of them in 11 states. Louisiana and Indiana are the two most recent, and they are massive, massive program. Indiana allows middle class kids to be eligible. And that's key, because if you're gonna get the lawmakers' support, you need to include your suburban areas and your middle class taxpayers. So what that means is you could have a scholarship for, say, $4,000 or $5,000 to attend a private school, and then you as a parent can make up the difference, or that private school might not charge more. What we found is elementary school private schools charge less than high schools. So some programs actually give a larger scholarship amount for high school, maybe of around $6,000. So they try to target what would be useful. They don't want to give you a $2,000 scholarship and tuition's $8,000 and it's not useful to you. So they really try to look at that. There is all kinds of other programs. So you've got voucher programs. DC is probably the most newsworthy one because it's been very controversial with Congress. Congress has had to authorize it. But you do have voucher programs in other cities and other states. Again, anytime any kind of school choice program passes in the state, the teachers union takes them to court. And so you have to look at your own state constitution and what is going to hold up against the Texas Supreme Court. And tax credit scholarships, in my opinion, and many others that have studied the state constitution and done some research, including the Institute for Justice, they are the public interest law firm that defends these cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. That's what they recommend because you get around where you're using public money to fund private schools that might be religious. That's kind of the area that can get a little bit iffy. So if you're using donations from business, it never touches the public coffers and you avoid that problem. So anyway, so this is a really good resource. Again, I have people say, where's Texas? There's no Texas in here. But it's got pictures in here and enrollment growth and how much the scholarships are worth and all kinds of things like that. I just lost my bookmark. So take that home with you. I hope that's useful. I've got another resource. This is something that's specific to Texas. We got this done right before session started because a lot of conservative groups that are against education vouchers are afraid that it'll harm private schools. So typically, the Republican clubs, the Tea Party groups, they're not so worried that that vouchers is wrong because parents don't deserve a choice. They're concerned, well, it's going to ruin private schools. Oh, we're going to add on a lot of regulations, and Big Brother's going to come in, and these private schools are run by the government. So we want to address that. So this is a short little piece. I helped edit it by Patrick Gibbons, and it is specific to Texas, and it talks about private schools. It talks about accreditation of private schools, the regulations they already have, and then what kind of regulations we've seen in other programs that have vouchers or scholarship programs, and has the interest from the private schools increased or decreased? Has the regulatory burden increased or decreased? All kinds of things like that. And so what we found for the most part is that, there's a couple of regulations that come about, like fingerprinting of teachers, which isn't a horrible thing. And sometimes, they ask for food inspections and health and safety, but a lot of that's already done. And that's already in Texas. And if the legislature were all of a sudden to pass a really bad bill and add a bunch of regulations on private schools, then the private schools could just say, no thank you. I'm not going to participate in this. No one in any kind of scholarship or voucher program forces a private school to participate. It is totally voluntary. And so that is the good thing about this. We have to remain vigilant, thank you, and make sure that a bunch of regulations don't pass in the future, because there may be pressure by teacher unions and things to do that. But private schools could drop out of the program if it became too much of a hassle. Now, because the cost of living is going up, because our economy is kind of a wreck a little bit, private schools are closing. And so private schools have shown a real interest in this because this is a way for them to keep their doors open. Some private schools are converting to charters, and I'll talk a little bit about why charter schools in a minute. And especially the Catholic schools, we've got a lot of Catholic schools on the New England coast up there, and they are lobbying hard for things like this to pass because it allows for them to continue their mission, which is to provide a Catholic education to those that want it. So there's a lot of different sides. There's also a big lobby effort by Jewish groups. I worked with the Jewish Orthodox Union. They're based in New York and in DC, and they have a big presence here in Texas. So there's a lot of interest. We've got Jewish students that would like to attend a Jewish day school, but their parents can't afford it. And so being able to get a scholarship to do that would allow that. Now, how you handle the religious piece is that is an after-school program that's not provided by the school. So like a Jewish day school would be teaching Hebrew, but they wouldn't necessarily be teaching religion. Same with the Catholic school. So that would be an after-school program. And some religious schools have chapel, and that's something students can opt out of. So again, the student is choosing that school. The parent is choosing that school, no one is forcing them to. So the idea behind school choice is that the free market works in every other way. You can choose which gas station to go to, which restaurant to go to. Why can't you choose which school to go to? And some would argue, well, you kind of do. You pick your house based off of the neighborhood. And if the neighborhood's nice and that school district is good, then that's where your kid's going to go. Well, what about the parent that doesn't have a lot of money and they're in a bad school district and they can't do much about it? They can't afford private school and they work, so they can't stay home and homeschool. So homeschooling is a form of school choice. You are choosing to pull your kids out of the public school system and educate them at home. Private school, you're paying for that yourself. That is a form of school choice. You are choosing to pay, on top of your property taxes, tuition to a private school. So you're basically paying twice for education with private school. And then if you put your kid in a charter school, you're putting them in a different public school. So charter schools are free. They're open enrollment, meaning that anyone can apply within the parameters of that charter. So it may be a K through 5 school, it could be a dropout recovery school, so you would kind of have to fit the type of student they're looking for. My husband actually works for a charter school in the Louisville area, which is North Dallas, and they have schools all over the state, and I wanted to tell you that they have one here in the Woodlands. It's the Vista. And so you've got all different kinds. In Texas, The State Board of Education, so this is like a school board, but it's the state level. Barbara Cargill, y'all know in your area, she is now the chair of it. Charter schools have to apply at the state level for a charter if they are their own group. And they are like a school district, but independent. So Houston ISD, for instance, it has its own charters because their school board chose to open a charter, and that charter principal and teachers then are under the umbrella of Houston ISD, but an independent charter like my husband's, they report to the State Board of Education. And so they put together an application and they go through an interview process and all that kind of stuff. So they receive public money. So your tax dollars are paying for charter schools. They do not receive money for facilities. So that's why you typically see charter schools trying to be really efficient on facilities, and they're in strip malls, and they're in old churches and daycares because the classroom space is already built out. There's a variety of them. What I love about charter schools, and you'll see this some with private schools, is the specialization. And some of the traditional schools are trying to copy this. And what I mean by that is if your student is amazing in math and science, what about putting them in a STEM school in high school? That is a science, technology, engineering, and mathematics focused school. What about having the opportunity of a robotics club that they could do after school in junior high? Let's say your kid is interested in the fine arts. Well, in Houston ISD, they have a magnet for that. But a lot of charter schools are in their own way a magnet. But again, they're free. And depending on how popular it is, there may not be a waiting list. You can go to a charter school that's focused on your students' needs. There's one in San Antonio for students with autism. It's a K-2 school. It's small and it's very expensive to run. But if you've got a child with autism, then you're really excited because that teacher knows how to deal with those students. So I'm getting the signal that I probably need to take some questions, and I have so much more to tell you, but as always, there's so much to talk about. I will say that constitutionally at the U.S. Supreme Court level, tax credit scholarships have never been ruled unconstitutional. It's been taken there twice, so that's another good thing to know as you're thinking about policy. I have at the back table some bumper stickers. I have a sign-up sheet if you want. Every once in a while I'll send out an email on education reform, and I can update you on what bills have passed. This session we had a victory. One of the reforms we've been pushing for years and years and years was raising the charter school cap. So the state board has a cap of 215. That's how many charters they're allowed by state law to issue across a state of 4 million students. And the cap just got lifted with SB 2. That was a great victory. The last 2 sessions, it was killed on a point of order on the House floor 5 minutes before midnight. I was, as many were really excited about passing, completely shocked. But this time, it made it all the way through. And so we're excited. There's some other good reforms that deal with process that aren't super important. But raising the cap, again, we're a free market group. We don't want a cap on innovation. And the cap was preventing other folks from coming to the state and opening schools. There's great charter chains, like districts in other states, and there was no incentive to move here and open schools because we were 1 or 2 charters away from hitting the cap, or 3 charters. It kept going up and down, maybe at 208, 209, 210, 212, and then it go back down because a school would voluntarily give their charter back. So now it's raised, I think it's like 10 or 15 a year for about 5 years. I think it goes up to 305. So that's good. That gives us some wiggle room to allow like Green Dot or Rocket Ship or some of these amazing charter schools in other states to open here. I'll name a couple of names of charter schools you've probably heard of. KIPP, K-I-P-P. Yes Prep, they are in Houston. IDEA, they're based in the Valley. My husband works for Responsive Ed, and they have the autism school, and they have a classical school. This is another example of specialization. So I would love my kids, and y'all might too, to have a school that's focused on the Founding Fathers, and that's back to the basics on classics. And that's what this model is. They just opened it in Louisville, which is North Dallas, and they're opening another one in Arkansas. They're using some money from the Walton Family Foundation. Classical, the name of the school is called Founders, and I can email you the website, Julie, but it's fantastic, it's free. And so this is the type of education, if we want to encourage our kids to learn about the values of American exceptionalism and the founding fathers and things like that. Specialization is allowing parents to pick. Another problem with the one-size-fits-all public school model is sex ed. That's a controversial issue. What do you feel comfortable with your kid or grandkid learning? What about creationism? What about evolution? What about Merry Christmas or Hanukkah or the teaching of other religions? If you get to pick the school that your child goes to, and you get to pick that curriculum, then you don't have as much conflict in society. So that's another positive. I want to talk a little bit about why we've not been successful on school choice and then open up for questions. Vouchers is a negative word. A lot of people are happy with their public school because they know their teacher personally, which is great. And their kids seem to be doing fine. They don't know that we have grade inflation, so a lot of kids get A's that shouldn't. And there's a lot of pressure on the teachers to do that. And we know that because we have really high remediation rates. So diploma, unfortunately, for every student does not mean the same thing. In some cases, unfortunately, a student goes to college, 2-year or 4-year, and they're not ready for college. And they're put in remediation classes, and either their parents or they are having to foot the bill, maybe take out some loans, to pay for high school math or reading classes before they can even take a college course. And research shows that if you take even one of those, your likelihood of graduating from college is very low. And so then we have kids that drop out of college that have a bunch of student loans. They probably don't have much self-esteem, and we could have done better by them. Maybe we should have worked with them more in high school and not given them a diploma yet until they were ready. Maybe they needed some more one-on-one time. And that's part of what we see again with charters, is they have dropout focused charters, and they do, like, let's say a student wasn't working in a traditional model, they go and they get one-on-one help, they take a test, they figure out where they're at, and then they may do some stuff online, they may do self-paced stuff. What courses do you need to graduate? They try to encourage them to get a diploma, again, because a GED is valued. But there's a real flexible schedule, so if you've got a criminal record, if you've got a child, if you are in foster care and you've got some issues at home, the charter law allows for flexibility. So the charter is able to be only open 4 hours a day. So that's much easier for some students if they're having to work. And then charters have the flexibility, they can pay their teachers more. They can fire their teachers, they don't have to have a teacher contract. They can be at-will employees. You don't have to be certified. So there's a lot of positives there. Some charters use that more than others.